Come bust this pussy open.
Welcome to the New York Times podcast, your cold like Columbia County of music news and criticism. I'm your host, John Caramonica, with cameras on today. It's not a game. It's not a game.
Let's go to Sunset City. Go to Sun City.
Justin Charity from The Ringer is here.
Hey.
Jayson Buford from Stereo Gum et al. Is here.
My man, what's up?
We're cameras on because it's a rowdy conversation, number one. We're talking about Lil Yachty, and perhaps more crucially, we're talking about the issues that arose in the wake of the release and the rollout of the new Yachty record, which is called Let's Start Here, which is, and I hesitate to even say this, not a rap album. Maybe it's a rap album by some definitions, largely not. But there was a tremendous amount of discourse in the wake of the arrival of this record. Some of it happening in the comments of Jayson's Instagram. This is fine, which is where all great rap conversations happen.
I agree.
Also, I want to shout out Alphonse Pierre from Pitchfork, who wrote an early review of this record that led to some tweets and some other discourse. Al could not be here today. Free Alphonse is all I have to say about that. Free my guy. Okay, first of all, I do want to say we were talking about reading thick books. This got nothing to do with Yachty. I just want to say this. I saw Justin. Yeah. Justin was in town recently. I saw Justin and we went to a bookstore and like I straight up bought a copy of de Tocqueville. True story. How is that looking to you? The original live journaler, Alexis de Tocqueville.
Well, you know, it's in the queue is the thing. Because like at the time I was reading Cryptonomicon, which I finished. Then I picked up Thomas Pynchon, Mason and Dixon, which I'm on. No, actually, and I skipped over. I read the last two of the three books in the Three Body Problem, Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. And then I got to read Moby Dick. It's in the queue. De Tocqueville's like, you know, he got to wait. He got to wait.
He waited 275 years for you to pick up his book. He can wait another 3 months. Jayson, but you said you are reading Moby Dick.
I am currently reading Moby Dick, yes.
What's the energy on that? And number one, what's the energy on that? Number one.
I'm not gonna lie. That's the thing. There really is no energy on that. I don't know. For me, I'm just trying to unlock something in my writing a little bit. So I was like, yo, let me just pick up Moby Dick real quick. Nah, the sentences are crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like on a lot of different ways, like this is really the book for a writer to really read.
Well, maybe we should give it to Lil Yachty, because as Lil Yachty famously said,
needs to read Moby Dick. Absolutely.
As Yachty famously said, call me boat mail. So, you know, let's talk. Okay, let's talk a tiny bit. Let me set the table. If you are perhaps unfamiliar with why we are devoting an episode in the year of our Lord 2023 to the Lil Yachty album, Let's Start Here. At the beginning of the show, you were listening to Pretty. This is one of several dreamscapes on this album. Yachty has delivered a Steve Lacy Tame Impala record, essentially. Fine, not a problem. Maybe the discourse is a little bit less about the merits of the record itself, although, Jayson, you talk about this in your column. Al talks about it in his review. Craig in his review, you know, get into the weeds on some of the ideas and quality issues on the record, but also the kind of bigger picture about how Yachty presented it, which is about wanting to be taken seriously and these kind of large questions about what kind of music Yachty or someone like him can and should be making. Before we get into the big picture stuff, though, can we talk about the album's quality? Jayson, just talk like pure music. Pretend that you approach this record, you know, just feeling it out in the middle of the woods. What's your take on the actual quality of the music?
So here's the thing, right? It's in line with Yachty's music in the past, which is it's not class conscious at all, right? And it's kind of quote unquote this free black boy kind of like Black Boy Joy style of music, right? And it's not agitated at all. And so you kind of sort of have this record that is, you take it on face value, right? There's nothing about Yachty on the record that's personal. There's never anything about Yachty on the record that is a challenge to you. It's kind of sort of this collection of sounds, right? And in theory, that's not bad. But it's in line with the same issues Yachty's had previously. And so what we're doing is we're not really giving Yachty any credit for specifically changing. We're just giving him credit for a new genre.
Justin, what do you make of this? How do you situate this album in relationship to the early Yachty records, whether it's Lil Boat or Teenage Emotions? How do you situate this record in relationship to those albums?
I agree with everything Jason's saying about like being, I would call it like pastiche or even Pinteresty, this album, right? And it's sort of, I don't know, I guess before I compare it to the earlier Yachty stuff, to me, it's helpful to sort of lay down for a second that
you want to lay down for a second? Why don't I put on the Why don't I put on the Yachty record so we could all lay down?
Tee you up
oh,
like
yeah, that's not what you
episode.
meant. That's not what you meant.
No,
okay,
but I just
John,
have other
John,
albums out.
You said you came from the psychiatrist. Yo, that psychiatrist music, though. You can lay down.
Yo, this is the BetterHelp hold music. My God.
No, but like, you know what this album reminds me of before we get into digging into crates with Lil Yachty is like, honestly, Nevermind, right? In so much as the genre stuff, like giving Yachty credit for another genre to pluck from, it's sort of like, this was kind of the problem with that Drake tape where it's like, on the one hand, some of the execution on it is interesting. On the other hand, it has this kind of low energy quality to it. And it almost feels too pastiche. It feels a little bit too much like, 40 making beats that are just uncharacteristic of him. Drake singing in ways that are like deploying his voice in interesting ways, but don't come together as proper Drake songs. And it's the Yachty thing. It's like, I'd say half of Let's Start Here is kind of like that. It feels kind of like it's almost like an artist trying to give you a tour of this stuff that's on his nightstand and not really figuring out how to make it feel like it is of him, right? Or how to synthesize it in his actual sort of house style.
Okay, this is an interesting thing, and this is something that I think we have to talk about in terms of the history of Lil Yachty. What is Lil Yachty good at over the last 6 years? Like, what has he been good at? Because I think, if I'm reading you correct, Justin, what you're basically saying is like, let's say there is this kind of like layer or filter that's so signature Yachty that it could be applied to all these other things. It could be applied to a straight hip hop record. It could be applied to a psych rock record. It could be applied to an indie pop record. Maybe what's missing is that signature filter or that signature lens is actually not strong enough to hold the move to some different sonic palette because you're not getting full Yachty. I mean, that's how I feel, but tell me how that scans for you.
To Jason's point about the Black Boy Joy thing, right? Like, that's really the strongest idea in sort of early breakout Yachty, right? Is just the beads, the red beads, the King of the Teens type posturing that he was doing for the first 5 years of his career. And I don't think there was a lot of there beyond kind of like that kernel of an idea. I think the truth of Lil Yachty then and now, and I think this will bear out after this album, frankly, is that he's Miley Cyrus, right? Like, I think what Yachty is a dabbler. That's why I'm not mad at this album, is because if you look at either early Yachty or Michigan Yachty and you look at those as sort of phases where it's like, if you take his commitments in those moments super seriously, then you react to this album differently than you do, I think, if you just look at him as Miley Cyrus, who every 3 years, he's just going to sort of paradigm shift himself and he's just going to dabble in something else. And when you look at him that way, I think a record like this goes down a lot easier, honestly.
Part of the reason that we're even engaging with this record in this specific way is because of what Yachty said at the listening event for the album, which is that he wanted to be taken seriously as an artist, not just some mumble rapper or SoundCloud rapper. Now, this can be read, I think, a couple different ways. Alphonse in his review and Jayson in your column, you read it in one way, which is that what he's basically saying is, I, as an artist, feel that rap is limiting and holds me back.
Yes.
Now, that's part of it. Now, I think it could also be read slightly more cynically as the universe perceives rap as less serious. Therefore, I, as a person who has broad ambitions, am aligning myself with the universe's perspective. Now, obviously, there are ways for people to imbibe these kind of like global sentiments and make them individualized and personalized. But it could be possible that what he's saying is actually, I'm plenty serious, but these jokers out here think I'm not serious because I make rap music. It could be that he's saying that. Again, he didn't clarify. He hasn't expanded. It's tough to know. But we have to at least be open to the idea that his relationship to like quote unquote artistic seriousness is not fully formed only in a vacuum, that it's being formed out in the world. The world is telling him that. He may be drinking from it and espousing it, but it's also what's being told to him. What do you think, Jayson? Do you think that that's possible, that some of it's in reaction to what he's hearing outside in, not just inside out?
Absolutely. This could possibly be something he feels, right, institutional-wise, that this is the music that I made on Poland, or the music that I made Michigan Boat Boy is not really the music that people are going to accept institutional-wise.
The universe thinks is serious.
The universe thinks is serious. But those things are rooted in the isms of the world, right? The classism of the
100%.
world, the racism of the world, right? The institutionalized aspect of music and the Grammys and all these different things. So when you're saying that and you're not expanding on it, you're kind of giving in to that. He's not the first rapper to do so.
No, not at all.
And also more serious rappers, as Justin was saying, more serious rappers than him have actually said it. I agree that like kind of we maybe need to think of Yachty as a dabbler, but Poland is as serious a song as you could possibly find in 2022. It really was,
incredible
right?
record.
It's
incredible
really an
record.
incredible record. Like it's not, there's no like unseriousness about it. It's actually like maybe one of the best records of that year. No question.
Absolutely.
Like undoubtedly.
100%. 100%.
So for me, it's like, well, you can make serious music, right? Like the Michigan stuff, I think like he's not as good as a rapper as those Michigan guys, right? Like pure rapper as those Michigan guys. He's not as good.
Right.
But in a lot of different ways, that is a serious record, right? Like it's a collection of these like different sounds. And even like the most serious of artists have dabbled in different things and made collections of sounds, right? Like Drake has dabbled in Atlanta. He's dabbled in this and that. He's taken from different places and made these into serious records, right? So for me, Yachty, whether he's serious or not serious as an artist, he still is making quote unquote serious music. It hasn't always been good. There's some stuff that literally has been
It's
like very simplistic. Yeah, there's some stuff that has not been good. But at Yachty's best, he's a really good artist at his best.
Let's listen to Poland right now, which I think, was it on No Bells or something? Some kid described it as quote generation defining, which sure, why not? Absolutely. If Die Lit is the first rap album that you ever bought, then Poland is generation defining.
Yeah.
Totally fine. Like I know that sounds shady.
It's not shit.
It's
You're
not
right.
No, it's
shady.
true.
You're
It's true.
It's just true. It's just true. I'm just an elderly person who said it. But it's true. It's not any less true.
The
because I'm
wisdom of the
elderly.
ancients.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So let's listen to Poland and then get back to this idea about seriousness.
Phone still ringing, battling all my demons. I've been fiending, yeah, girl, I've been fiending. Hope you love me, baby, I hope you mean it. To Poland, I took the walk.
Okay, so to me, one of the interesting value propositions about Yachty early in his career, Minnesota era Yachty, is that he didn't take rap seriously. Now, I'm not saying he wasn't a good rapper. I'm not saying he didn't make good rap songs. I'm saying he didn't take, quote unquote, rap, quote unquote, seriously, quote unquote.
He was goofing off.
And this was like the source of unending stress for like the Ebros and the Joe Buddens of the world, number one. But also, I remember reading those early profiles of Yachty, and Yachty was basically like, what I took seriously is I had to get to New York. I had to get to like the right parties. I had to like meet Vashti or whoever the hell he wanted to meet. You know, it's like he was very, very, very focused on things that would further his career. So there's nothing unserious about Yachty. Nothing at all. This is a person who is driven, who is knowledgeable, who is an astute reader of cultural spaces, extremely knowledgeable about music, about fashion, a great conversationalist, you know, like super, super knowledgeable. He's a very serious person, but he did not approach making rap music with like what we would classically think of as like the reverence that should be fit. So my take on this record is like he has now approached making a different kind of music, sort of with the same kind of casualness.
I agree with that 100%.
That's how this feels to me. And again, it's no knock on the quality of the songs, although I happen to think this record is not a success. But I think from an approach perspective, I'm not sure that this is like a much, much more considered approach to whatever this sound is than Lil Boat was to whatever that sound was. That's how this makes me feel.
That's completely fair.
Lack of seriousness is what he does optically.
Let me take that, right, and sort of explain. I think part of why I found myself dissenting from some of the criticism of this Yachty album, right? It's like you both have talked about other rappers kind of pulling this sort of self-conscious, I want to be taken seriously move. The one that always comes to mind to me is like Tyler, the Creator, having that conversation with Larry King, being like, I'm sick of rapping. Like, I want to, you know what I mean? Do all these other things with my voice and all that stuff. And so like, I remember it's like the reaction some people are having to this Yachty record. It's like, that's the reaction I was having to Tyler at that time. I was like, how dare you shit on this thing that like, one, we both love. You're a rapper shitting on rap music. It's one thing to not want to sort of have to kowtow to all the gatekeepers who want to have this really conservative view of rap, but you don't have to go around sort of dumping on the genre and throwing it under the bus and being like, I wish I was a rock musician, right? It's a thing people have been doing. Kanye did it at points. Like, I don't like when people do that move, but I also think it matters, right? That, you know, Odd Future has a sense of irreverence about it. I guess my benchmark for Tyler, the Creator, is just different. Whereas because my benchmark for Yachty is this sense of carelessness, of never-ending youthfulness, of sloppiness, frankly, no matter what sort of he's dabbling in any given era of Lil Yachty, when he says this stuff about wanting to be taken seriously, when he does that kind of negging of hip-hop, I'm not even in a position to take that seriously. And I think maybe that's what it is about this record. It's like, I don't... You
mean like discursively, you don't take it seriously.
You know what I mean? It's sort of like, I understand. It's easier for me. And maybe it's just like, I've gotten older too, right? I'm older than I was when I first saw that Tyler, the Creator interview with Larry King. And it's just like, I listened to Yachty say this stuff and I'm like, oh, right. Okay. This kid, now he's 25. He had his first run at success when he was younger. He's allowed to have some sporadic, inconsistent, malleable ideas about what it is he even wants out of music in a way. And like, maybe that's also a grace I should have given Tyler, the Creator, and who knows who else in my time as a critic.
Though, if I may, like the thing about Tyler is he's so good at rapping and so good at making rap music that it's kind of just like, what are you talking about, bro? You're so good at this, and like in a way that's like,
and his voice is so specific. His voice is like, I mean,
he's got one of the more like he's got one of the more distinct voices in rap in the past like 15 years. So it's kind of sort of like, yo, like, do you realize how good you are at this? You should probably continue to dabble. Like, to me, and I put this in my column, Call Me If You Get Lost is like just as dynamic as Igor or Flowerboard, any kind of neo soul kind of like treehouse freak out music he's ever made, right? Like, I mean, it's got so many different kind of lush sounds and so many of these different ideas and themes. And he even talks about his feelings on rap, about how he's still here from, you know, all these people that down him. And that's in a lot of ways is similar, I think, to what Yachty was saying in terms of like, how I interpret it was that these gatekeepers have kind of put me down. And so now I'm going to move away from this. But, you know, the Buttons and the Ebros of the world, they moved on, to be honest.
Well,
they moved
and
on.
also
or capitulated.
Right. Well, exactly, because they're not stronger than the actual movement of the youth that is changing what the genre sounds like.
Yes.
But it's interesting because I think what Yachty is actually responding to are two parallel forms of conservatism coming from two different ecosystems. One, OG conservatism, real head conservatism within hip hop that basically said in 2016, 2017, 2018, hey kid, this thing that you're doing, that ain't it. We're not messing with that. So putting him kind of like with his peers, SoundCloud, Mumble, whatever you want to call it, in this kind of defensive posture. And Yachty's an extraordinarily bright guy. Like, he's not just going to like brush that off. He's going to like take it in and understand the dynamics of it. That's one conservatism. Then there's the second conservatism, Jayson, which is what you pick up on in your column, which is like broad speaking racial conservatism, which is basically like, in order for a young black artist sometimes to be taken seriously in like broader pop music by white audiences, it may require abandoning the sort of formats of hip hop that we all think are completely valid and like great vehicles for artistic expression. But there's an entire system still in 2023 still telling them there's more serious music out there. So imagine like being beset on both sides by those kinds of parallel, companionable conservatisms. And then being a kid who's like, I literally just want to make records that I like, but I can't win in either direction. That's kind of how this scanned to me, this like little mini speech, which frankly, people are like reading into the speech, I think, a little bit more than they are the album itself. But you feel what I'm saying, Jayson? Like, it's kind of like, it's like a no win, really. Like, who were the people who were reaching out to Yachty and be like, you're doing great? Some critics, a lot of fans, a lot of young people, but like on both sides, there were people who were just like, yeah, this ain't it. We don't mess with
in
this.
A lot of different ways, though, I think a lot of those old heads were talking crazy, but in a way, like, I'm kind of measured on it because I do think Yachty is a little bit fundamentally at first an unserious artist. Whereas X or Juice or even Uzi Vert at that time, they were much more serious artists than Yachty was, right? Within that SoundCloud mentality. They really were, right? Like, if you listen to X or listen to Vert, it's so urgent, right? Whereas, like, if you listen to Yachty, it's not at all. So I think in a lot of different ways, like, you can either look at what the old heads are saying as, you old heads, or what you can do is you can be like, I understand what they're saying, but, right? Like, and for me, I understand what these guys are saying, but.
Let's listen to something else off the new record. One thing that I find happens on this album is a guest shows up who feels extraordinarily present and really like destabilizes the balance of the songs. So let's listen to The Ride. And I think this is Tizo Touchdown on The Ride. And I remember just being, the first couple times I listened to this song, incredibly struck by the part of the song without Tizo and then the part of the song with Tizo and how different they felt.
A quick zoom to the moon, come on around. Baby, if you get eyes, just close your eyes. It gets lonely at the top, baby.
One thing that I want to add when we're talking about the sort of sonic quality of Yachty's music is like, not all music has to be sober and serious and like purposeful and like, with like hard intentions and like history on its mind. Like it's okay to come at it from a different perspective. But I do think if you're coming at it from a different perspective than that, you run the risk when you then show up and say, my desire is to be taken seriously, when that has not necessarily been the main characteristic of all the artistic product to date. Justin, what do you make of Yachty? Is he giving lip service, do you think, to seriousness? Does it feel like the music on this album is delivered in your mind with more intent, more rigor than the music on prior records?
No, I think that's the characterization I've seen that I think I maybe most disagree with. The part of the premise of a lot of conversations I just don't accept is that even though I know that it's based in hearing Yachty talk about what he's trying to do, is that the album sounds particularly serious, right? Like, I think that's the issue. It's like, I think that what we might agree on is that along the way, even after having technically not only survived, but thrived after the initial old head backlash to his emergence, right, is that he internalized some stuff. He put a chip on his shoulder. I think that stuff is true for sure. But I don't know. I do mostly I listen to that Let's Start Here and I mostly hear, I just don't hear seriousness. I don't actually know where the assessment of this is a serious record is coming from, other than, again, his quotes from the album release. And also what feels like a kind of arguably like toxic assumption that there is some inherently serious quality to like white rock or something. You know what I mean? Like, and I also just reject that premise, right? John, we did an episode of Popcast years ago about Frank Ocean's Blonde, where I talked about this. It's like, you know, just because you make a fake Radiohead song don't mean that you're nice, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, to me, it's not, I don't take that, like, and I like Radiohead, bro. Like, I like Radiohead, but it's not like I hear that and go, like, and maybe this is the calculation Yachty thought he was making, and I just don't, it doesn't compute in my head like that. But that's not, there's nothing self-evidently serious to me about that, or it's not like I give you points. It's not like I hear that and go, oh, he listened to the Who's Tommy album I'm sitting up now. It's, you know what I mean?
Or a Tame Impala record, or a Chairlift record. Now, the producer on these tracks is Patrick Wimberly, who was part of Chairlift, a band that is bad, you know, just like a bad band. I'm sorry, always been a bad band, an uninteresting bad band, a real entry point into like whimsical weirdo. Like, no, sorry. We're on one today. We're getting emails. I know, like I'm on one today, but like
we on camera, all of
we
them.
on camera and we on one. It's worth saying. It is not surprising that this album, which pretends to seriousness but is not, is largely produced by someone, white, black, otherwise, doesn't matter, who was in a major band that pretended to seriousness but was otherwise. This is also for people who are emailing me about my Caroline Polachek comments a couple weeks ago. This is sort of the same thing. We're written the thing. And so, Justin, I think what you're saying is right, but the question is like, you're viewing it through the lens of being a critic and having some emotional distance and taking the product on the face value terms of the product. Yachty is living inside it. And so he may be at a place where he's experiencing that thought process that you're saying is not the thought process that you are approaching with. But it's like, you know, intention of the text, intention of the author, intention of the reader. It's like, it's always going to be different.
Even though to me, I think it's definitely, I think with repeat listens, I definitely get at least half of this album is just, again, it's my reaction to Honestly Nevermind, where it's just like, even if I respect some of the little details of this, and if I respect also the sort of major mission of it, a lot of the execution just leaves a lot to be desired. But part of me maybe is also reacting to like, okay, when it was Yachty versus the Ebros, right? A lot of people had his back from this perspective of like, yo, let this kid color outside the lines. But then we get here and it's like, now it seems like some of the pushback to Yachty is, oh, color outside the lines. No, not like that. And it's just like, well, what do you like about the kid? I worry about people becoming Ebro, but just advancing a slightly different argument about what he's doing. And no one's obligated to like it. No one's obligated to be like, well, because he's the zany king of the, you know, what will he do next type thing. Like, it's not about saying anyone's obligated to like or respect it, but it's just that like, I do think that he's being sloppy in a way that's kind of core to the Lil Yachty value proposition. And again, it goes back to the point about Miley. It's just like I think in the Miley Cyrus wars, right? Like there was a point where we were so in deep with what she was doing to piss people off that you could only see the trees and not the forest. And I think now we've gotten far enough away where it's just like, oh yeah, she wasn't just doing that stuff to be like, I'm going to capitalize on a market trend, because her overall career arc ultimately it turned out to be somewhere it's like, yeah, no one would have written that for her, right? Like this is clearly she was doing a bunch of stuff. She was using way too many napkins.
She was doing stuff. Also, just as a total sidebar, like Yachty talking on the Nelk Boys podcast about doing DMT every day, like that may be frankly more revealing about the tone of this album than anything he said at the listening party or any fight he had with Ebro in 2017. I mean, I don't know. I can't call, that's not my lane. I don't do that. But I'm just very simply saying, okay, we got to throw to the break, but like, I want to come back and talk about psychedelics. So we'll be back in just a moment. Let's listen to Running Out of Time, which feels sort of very Tyler-ish to me. We'll be back in a second.
Running out of time with me.
We're back. Jayson Buford is here. Justin Charity is here. John Karamonka is here. We're talking about Yachty. One thing that I feel like hasn't come up in the discourse yet that I'm curious about is if you look at the last 7-8 years of Atlanta rap, the main aesthetic and like philosophical through line is fundamentally psychedelia. It's in the vocals of Young Thug and Future and everybody who inherited them. It is not surprising that this particular strain of eccentricity would resonate so heavily with someone who grew up in that scene and who has seen the world, but still is very grounded in that scene. And I actually wonder if maybe this album is being read. I don't know if I agree with this, but it's an interesting thought exercise. If this album is being read incorrectly, is it not, maybe it's not an incursion into like, quote unquote, like white indie rock or whatever it is. Maybe it's an extension of Atlanta psychedelia with like different toolkit. Throwing it out there. Don't know if I agree, but I felt like I wasn't seeing enough. I saw a lot of comparing this album to like the Tame Impalas of the world, another bad band, but like, but I didn't see enough conversation of how does it actually fit in thematically with what's happened in Atlanta for the last 5 to 10 years.
I think in a lot of ways, Atlanta is the home of kind of like eccentric black pop, right? Or eccentric black music, right? All the way to Outkast to Young Thug. The comparison makes sense, but at the same time, you keep mentioning like the people who Yachty did the music with are bad bands. And I will say, they're the type of bands that black artists big up who aren't even good. There's always this theory that black artists like corny white music. And like, that's kind of like this Tame Impala. that's kind of like this Tame Impala thing. And it's like, yo, like the thing about Ye and his forays into different type of genres is Ye, before he went off the deep end, had amazing taste in those music, right? Like he really did. And he was able to kind of piece them together in this time frame of, you're in my house, you're in this house of hip hop, and we're gonna like put you here.
Right. And this is where the Ye filter is so much stronger than the Yachty filter.
Right. Yeah. Whereas with this Yachty record, yes, it could be home to this like Atlanta kind of like music, but even though Yachty is rooted in that, this is very much not that. This is, we're meeting them here.
I think this is a good distinction to draw because it's sort of like, look, when you're digging in the crates with Kanye, those are some musty, earthy, rich crates, a lot of crates. You digging in the crates with Yachty is, well, I got this Tame Impala record. I got the one Pink Floyd album that everybody knows. You know what I mean? So it's like that. It is kind of that quality to it.
The first song on this record.
It's Any Color You Like, right?
It's like, yeah, it's Any Girl Do You Like. It's also Money. Like, it's also like these kind of like, this kind of, I think I put it in the column, right? It's just like David Gilmour kind of style of like consciousness lyrics with like minutes of instrumentation. And that's like the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon like template. That's the whole thing.
Don't get me started on Pink Floyd, for Christ's sake.
Oh, no, you're not about to do this. Now, you do it every other band, but no, actually.
John Perils is about to come to my house and stab me for my thoughts on Pink Floyd.
We can't do this,
bro. You can't do that. No. Now you crossing bridges that we got to burn down.
Oh, my
Hold on,
God.
now. You know what I'm saying? Like, I went to college with the Jesuits. Come on, man.
Okay, but do you feel like, you're talking about the Dungeon Family, Outkast, Goody Mob, into the kind of trap psychedelia of Thug and Future and so on and so forth. When you hear Yachty's vocal style, whether it's old Yachty or this new iteration of Yachty, does it feel connected to those eccentricities? To me, it doesn't feel quite connected to it, but I wonder if just like the general environment of like Atlanta is a safe place to innovate. It's a safe place to try an unusual approach. Nobody's going to look askance at you. It's not like New York in 1997 where people are like, why are you doing that?
I'll answer first, because I want to say no, and I want to say this was in the formative stages of Lil Yachty, what my hang up with him always was. Even though not aligning with the kind of old head kind of, I'm not feeling this kid, it was always, to me, the sense of like, oh, Lil Yachty is kind, and again, it's why I compare him to Miley Cyrus before I would compare him to Young Thug or Future or Andre, right? Is that like Lil Yachty's version of eccentric and eclectic and weird is kind of like the mall version. It's kind of like what an adult wants to believe a weird eclectic kid is, when really a weird eclectic kid is more like Lil Vert or something, right? It's Lil Yachty is kind of like what a parent hopes kids are into these days. That it's like always this really kind of like glossy, bossy, its own thing. I would draw a super hard distinction between that kind of Atlanta psychedelia that you're saying and what Lil Yachty was doing.
Fair. Totally
I think,
fair.
in fact, I think that distinction was like a huge part of what his value proposition was at one point.
In part, he became a brand ambassador because of how comfortable he makes people feel.
He was like Chance.
You know, he really was. Chance clearly has a kind of like Chicago, Common, and Kanye type of tree, so it's different. But in a lot of ways, he is like Chance, right? This kind of brand ambassador that kind of can make people feel comfortable. The only difference, I think, is that the music that Yachty's influenced by are these kind of like trap eccentrics, right, from Atlanta, whereas I think Chance is kind of more of this like genre that's already readily made accepted, right? Like this kind of like spoken word Chicago type of style. They kind of sort of are the same kind of like personas, if you will.
I will say one thing that I've thought a couple times during this conversation is obviously like sonic experimentation is not for everybody. Kids, like, don't always try this at home. It also made me really relieved that like someone like Jay-Z never did this. Like, you know, like I just like Jay-Z, despite liking terrible indie rock in the 2000s, as he had been on camera talking about a couple of times, never was like, I'm going to make a record. Like, yeah, Grizzly, he never did I mean, I hope. I mean, if he did, I assume it's Guru has burned the tapes. I would never want to hear that. Please, I beg, if that exists, I never want to hear that. But a thing that I was thinking about in regards to Jay, and this is going to be a tiny bit of pivot, going off of something Jayson and I were talking about on the phone earlier. After the Grammys, there's a video that goes around online of Jay-Z hugging Rakim and thanking Rakim. And it occurred to me that Jay was talking to Rakim as if he'd never met him. Now, I don't know if they've met before. I don't know if they met in the 80s or the 90s, and they just hadn't seen each other in a while. But it occurred to me there was a chance, and perhaps even a really good chance, that they had not met previously. And the Grammy Hip Hop 50 thing, I really liked it. I think there are reasons to enjoy it, and there are some legit critiques of how it was put together. But one thing that we don't always see are these kind of intergenerational conversations. The Grammys have been sticking 70-year-old rockers with 50-year-old rockers with 30-year-old rockers for my entire life, but almost never doing that with rappers. This is the first time where I'm looking at people from different generations, different scenes, all together. And if you look at the backstage photos, you look at the other photos that were sort of coming off of the Grammys floor that made it to Instagram, a lot of unlikely connections, right? And it made me think about the Yachty, the sort of early Yachty tension, where people of an older generation were so fixed in their idea of what rap music should be that they could not rightly see that someone like Yachty was a natural inheritor to all of the stuff that had come before. And the Grammys thing made me think like, well, damn, like if more things like this had happened 10 years prior, 20 years prior, if younger artists understood the value of engaging with the older artists, if older artists didn't turn their ears off to what younger artists are doing, hip hop is very conservative, as we know. It's the most experimental, advanced music in pop, and yet people who make it and are successful tend to be very conservative in their taste profiles. This is unfortunate. I hate it, but it is what it is. This is all a very elaborate way of saying, like, I think Yachty caught a bad one 6 years ago, in part because the Grammys, an organization like the Grammys and things like that, basically abandoned responsibility for facilitating intergenerational dialogue. And that is in part why Yachty shows up on the stage at that event and says, I'm tired of being dismissed as a SoundCloud rapper. If he had just met Melly Mel, if Melly Mel had flexed in front, just one time, maybe he wouldn't have felt, I don't know.
Like Ghostface, maybe more,
right,
Yachty and Ghostface.
Right, yeah, he meets Ghost, you know what I mean? Like
but yeah, pick up on that idea, because to me, that's like that conservatism that we talked about. I think part of the thing that would undo that are more events, occasions for people to get out of their little buckets, let out of their, like, I'm a studio rat, I only work with people who I work with, and actually look around and be like, oh, that person who's 20 years older than me does the same thing I do. That person who comes from a different part of the country than I do does the same thing I do. I think that's sort of where the Yachty thing, just to circle back, that's kind of where the Yachty conservative pushback comes from.
Well, but just to the point about the Grammy, like the sort of framing as the Grammys being a kind of institution that's relevant to this, it's like, I don't know that the Grammys necessarily circumvents the problem of, let's say, conventional radio, often kind of for these new artists that are coming from sort of an emergent practice. It's almost like hip hop, even like set aside the Grammys for a second. It's almost like hip hop itself looks at certain kinds of new rappers like it's an immune response, right? Like the antibodies are mobilizing to shoot this thing down out of airspace. And like, if it survives, okay, give it 10 years and then maybe they'll sit down with Elliot Wilson and chop it up as if, you know, it never happened, right? But like before that time, I think hip hop, even aside from sort of institutions like larger or like maybe more universal than it, I think hip hop itself just, I don't know. There's something about even the last vestiges of gatekeepers within hip hop that it's such a kind of almost inherently antagonistic musical culture. I think for better or worse, right?
But it's also a scarcity mindset, because if hip hop has been so systemically kept out, it's been so systemically pushed to the margins by like the bigger music industry. If people in New York radio can't bear the idea of giving Atlanta records 2 slots an hour, it's a scarcity mindset. And so that's the problem. And I'm not saying it's on the Grammys. I'm just saying that generally speaking, there should be more opportunities for people who make the art form, old and young alike, to understand that this is a continuum. And if you understand it's a continuum that changes and grows and has different shapes and different tones and different moods, you're less likely to look at the kid who sounds like Yachty and be like, he's not one of us.
Part of it's scarcity in this sort of like capital Marxist way you kind of talking about it, like we're fighting over resources. But I do think part of it too is a cultural thing where like hip hop in a way that I love, like as a person who identifies as a hater, right? Like part of it is also just like the way hip hop works and certain corners of Black culture work is that antagonism. It's like the steel sharpens steel thing, right? It's kind of like, yo, if you're going to be a part of this culture, like you need to be able to sort of like have somebody kind of push you and you push back after a point, right? Like somebody like Yachty did need to learn how to kind of defend himself in his craft and his position, right? Like I do think part of the tragic thing about his comments about the album rollout is the signs that like, oh, actually, instead of learning how to stick up for himself, he kind of internalized a little too much of that pushback from 6 years ago.
His music wasn't hater proof though. That's the thing also.
Yeah.
It wasn't. His music, like Young Thug's music is hater proof, right? Like in a weird way, like when people clown Young Thug, they look at people like, yo, you sound silly. Like, yo, Young Thug is nice. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, yo, no. Like, yo, when Lord Jamar was talking about like Young Thug and like wearing dresses and stuff, he looked stupid. Like, he really did.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yo, Young Thug is so good. Like, J. Cole said it in one time in like a Agent Martinez interview, and this is J. Cole we're talking about. He was like, yo, Young Thug is a genius. I don't know why my fan base is surprised I'm working with him. Like it's so obvious to people that Young Thug's a genius, where like Yachty's music, it's not hater proof. So Jay-Z's music is hater proof, right? So in a way where it's kind of like, sure, but I mean, that can be tough, right? Like I think early Drake got it from people because he quote unquote was too soft. I think there's a specific change from Take Care to Nothing Was the Same, because that is Nothing Was the Same is kind of his first like I'm Brolic album. It's his first like I'm Brolic album.
Tough Drake.
Yeah, that is a loaded thing with Drake that we can't even get into right now. But that in a way is the start of, okay, I want to be accepted in these hip hop circles. And I think for different artists, it's more complicated, right? It's different and see if like which artist is better in this phase, which artist is better in the other phase, right? Like it's different. I think Tyler's currently making the best music of his life. I think Igor is probably the music he wants to make. But to me, Call Me If You Get Lost, like he kind of combined everything that I really liked about him with these kind of parameters of hip hop and how universal it is. The reason why Live Love ASAP was so powerful when it came out is it takes this kind of intergenerational aspect of rap and includes it in this one kind of like fashion guy, Rocky, right? Like this, like we can be Dipset, we could also be Bone Thugs, we could also be Goody Mob, we could also be 3 6 Mafia. Like we can kind of do any single thing.
I'm also glad you mentioned Drake in this context, because actually Drake's a really good example of someone going the opposite direction of Lil Yachty.
He stuck up for himself.
He stuck up for himself.
Drake doubled down.
And also stopped making like Peter, Bjorn, and John sample songs. You know what I mean? Like he stopped making those songs, which to me, I understand there's like a baked in cynicism for that era, 2011 or 2010. There's a bit of a cynicism in that era of the internet that we want to get blog attention. I mean, this is like, if you are like a 23-year-old listening to this podcast, you will not remember what it was like to get blog attention in like you really was not there in like the late 2000s or the dawn of the 2010s. Doing things like sampling Peter, Bjorn, and John, which is ludicrous. It's ludicrous. It's as bad as these half chairlift records that are on the yacht. Such a terrible idea. Drake's a more coherent artist, and Drake triumphed because Drake realized instead of being like, I kind of got on that way and I'm going to stay that way, Drake was like, I got on that way and now I could just make rap records or Afrobeats records or like grime records, whatever he wants to make. But he's not doing those kind of like pandering records anymore. Thank God. But I'm glad you mentioned Drake because Drake's a great example of someone who could have gone down this path. Like we could be talking about the 7th Drake album that has indie rock samples on it. Like it's not unthinkable that could have happened.
The thing about Drake though is Drake loves hip hop, has always like loved it. Like Fonte was his favorite rapper in like 07. And that is like real, like quote unquote black music. Whereas I think Yachty, who knows what he meant by that? But when you listen to the music, okay, like there's a totally different kind of style and vibe here. I feel for Yachty because it's like these old heads, man, like they say things that are like homophobic or
they're closed-minded. They're closed-minded in 100 ways.
Very closed-minded, but in a lot of different ways as well. Just because they're closed-minded, that doesn't mean they're always wrong.
Can we at least talk about the word you just used, right, which is pandering? I think that's maybe where I'm on one side of the line and you guys are on the other side. I just don't know that I listen to Let's Start Here and Here. I hear, again, maybe something misguided, maybe something that, again, 3-6 years from now, we're going to be like, yeah, remember that one time in the 3rd of 7 Yachty phases, he did the Pink Floyd thing, right? Like, wow. But like, I don't know what about it exactly is pandering, right? Is it really just inherently the case that, well, when Drake sort of leans into his love of like Jodeci and Aaliyah, that's not pandering because it's something about the tradition of black music. But if Yachty's like, yo, I'm 25 and I wanted to do like a Pink Floyd homage.
I want to make a stoner record, like a different kind of stoner record.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know what's necessarily pandery about one thing and not about the other.
I agree. Totally fair. And let me add a thought exercise on top of that. Because I was trying to think of all the different ways in which this Yachty album could make sense. Whether it's great or not is a separate conversation, but how it could make sense. What if, and again, pure thought exercise, this is the kind of album that Yachty always wanted to be able to make when he was 14, 16, 18. But because of the circumstances of the scene that he came up in, where he grew up, who he was surrounded by, what cultural expectations are of someone coming from that world, he did not feel at age 18 or 20 that this was a type of album that was available to him to be made, but now has finally arrived at something that feels true to himself. Again, I think the more likely answer is what Justin is saying, which is like it's phase 3 of 7. But is it not a more generous read to say, hey, it's totally possible this is an album that was always in the back of his head?
If it is, and then it's a worse album than I think it is. Right? Because this doesn't have the quality of something like Awaken My Love, right? Where you could say that about like Awaken My Love, where you're like, why do all the...
Wait, do you like Awaken My Love?
No, I don't.
No.
I don't. But what I will say is this, right? Which is like, I think it's
that almost took a turn.
No, I don't. I complain about that album constantly, but what I will say is that I think that there's a level of execution. Again, whether I like the album or not, I at least listen to Awaken My Love and I'm like, yeah, you tell me that this dude wanted to make this album from the beginning and that explains why none of the other music he made up to that point feels like it ever made any sense whatsoever. But
that's exactly how I feel about that record too. Yeah.
But it's like I'd buy that about because you listen to it and you're like, look, I don't love that album, but I at least hear it and I get that sense of like he really wanted to make this. I think the issue with the Yachty thing is like if the alternative theory you're proposing, John, of like, no, this is this of all the things he's done, of all the dabbling, this is the one thing he actually always wanted to make. It feels like, oh, if it's supposed to be a culmination in the way that Awaken My Love is supposed to be a culmination for Gambino, it's a much weaker culmination.
I mean, to be frank, if I had made that same exact argument, but about Michigan Boy Boat, that would be more credible. That would be more credible about that album because I know that people have mixed feelings about that record. I generally find that album to be pretty successful and maybe the second best Lil Yachty project. To me, it demonstrates seriousness of purpose, reverence, study, care. Now, again, Yachty is not rapping as hard as the other folks on that record, but he's showing you how intently he cares and loves and is a student of this particular micro movement. And if you had told me that about that record, I could buy it. I agree with what you're saying, Justin. Like, this is not, again, pure thought exercise, but it's like I want to take the threads to their logical conclusion.
In a way, Childish Gambino's hip hop records are not good because, as Justin said, like, it didn't sound like anything. Like, it's just like, do you like this? Like, it doesn't sound like something that he could possibly be doing. Whereas Awaken My Love, even though I don't like it, does sound like something that he does like to do.
That's somebody's passion project. You know it's somebody's passion project.
It's a really passion record. It's not my type of music, but it's a really passion record. Whereas for me, when I look at Yachty, even though he is this fundamentally unserious artist and this kind of strip mall, suburban kind of like Fantasia, if you will, even this candy paint kind of music, even though that is the case, to me, something like Minnesota or Poland or even Michigan Boat Boy felt like him. Whereas this does not really feel like his forte.
This is really Journey's type beat.
Right.
For all my mall heads.
Yeah, exactly.
Real Journey's type beat.
Real Journey type beat. Yeah. It's
So what you guys are saying to me is when we do the Awaken My Love 20-year anniversary podcast, y'all coming back for that. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm getting everybody confirmed now. We locking dates.
Do you remember how bad Because the Internet was?
Yeah, and it's like you know what it is? It's with time because of all this stuff. And there's like other media that Gambino produced that like I like, right? Obviously Atlanta, but like because of that, people try to brainwash you into like, yeah, Camp was good. Now you got to admit it. And it's like, no, I don't. I listened to that in the car like 3 months ago just to make sure I hadn't lost my mind or had a blackout or got confronted by Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, the Men in Black, and they flashy thing me and I forgot how bad I listened to that album again. It's not good. The other stuff is not good. Stop it. That was dabbling.
I feel healed.
Can we get Flex Bombs on Popcast? Is that possible?
Yeah, we're going to get them. Pedro, we're going to unearth the Flex Bombs 100%. Look, I don't know what else we could talk about. This is a phenomenal way.
Where do we think Yachty goes from here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean,
country album, whatever. He's kind of late to that.
Dead ass. Like when I did the Kanye Wyoming thing and everybody went after the event to the bar in Jackson, Wyoming. That's like the rodeo bar. Yachty was so comfortable, happy to be there, felt it. Why not? Get him a red cowboy hat. Let's go. Like, why not? Yachty, call Sam Hunt. Call Bailey Zimmerman. Call him up. Tap in. Hit the DMs. Maybe he's on the Wallen record. Like, what do I know? Like,
actually, yeah.
That actually could be tough, though. That's the thing.
Who could say? Who could say?
Who are we to say that? That could be tough, bro.
Could be tough.
I'll allow it.
He got a one-time pass. He got a one-time.
Good enough for Dirk. It's good enough for me.
That's on my t-shirt. That's on the t-shirt I wear to bed every night. Yeah. Justin, Jayson, thank you so much. That is our show. Listen to every podcast ever at nytimes.com/podcast. Email us podcast@nytimes.com. Buy the t-shirt. It's thepopcast.myshopify.com. I'm going to keep them on this Grammy sale for a little bit longer. So if you want to dive in, go ahead and get that. Subscribe anywhere you get your audio content, Apple, Spotify, etc. Get in the Facebook group, get in the Discord, tinyurl.com/popcast, Facebook/popcast Discord. Our producer doing double duty this week. It's Pedro Rosado from Headstepper Media, fighting through mic issues, fighting through the Grammys. We'll be back next week. Let's do Michigan Boat Boy. Let's do something from a solid, beautiful Lil Yachty era. This is Hybrid, Yachty and Babytron, Jason's favorite rapper.
Babytron, bad boy in 89, exotic pop buddy, got me walking around like Frankenstein. Off-white ones up like Jordan back in 85. Prices going up, for a bid you gotta pay me $5. High upper rows and bands at the same time. How the hell is gangsters graduating from St. John's? I don't follow no one on the road to pay my own lines. 20 gif, he's trying to swipe a Chevy, gotta make it mine. 23 done made like 30 million, you can check my taxes. I only letting beat her run, it's just